Good morning. I'm Commander Sean Robertson, and I will be facilitating the brief this morning. We'll begin with a brief, quick communications check. Sir, can you hear me?
Yeah, good morning, Sean. I can hear you.
This brief should last approximately 45 minutes. Today we have UK Major General Chris Ghika, Deputy Commander Stability for Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve from Baghdad, Iraq, for an update on coalition operations. Sir, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Sean, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for your time today. It's great to be back on a PPC, and I'd like to give you an update on where we are currently in our mission to secure the enduring defeat of Daesh. I think the most significant recent milestone for us was probably the defeat of Daesh in Baghdad, Syria on the 23rd of March, which saw the end of the group's control of any physical territory. We must reflect on this great achievement by our partner forces and the coalition, because for 5 years, Daesh's reign of terror instilled unbounded fear into innocent Iraqis and Syrians. Today, it has been reduced to an underground organisation, forced out of population centres and into hiding in caves and in the mountains. Its aspirations for a global caliphate have been destroyed. However, we cannot be complacent, because this is not the end of Daesh or the operations against Daesh. Although it is now on the back foot, Daesh foresaw the fall of its physical caliphate, and it has been reorganising itself into a network of cells intent on striking key leaders, village elders and military personnel to undermine the security and stability in Iraq and Syria. Daesh fighters are still ambushing security patrols, detonating IEDs and conducting kidnappings. Despite its territorial setbacks, Daesh is still having successes, and its ideology still inspires people around the world. We saw this on Easter Sunday with the devastating attacks in Sri Lanka. Last month, Daesh's leader Baghdadi appeared online for the first time in over 5 years, conceding defeat in Baghdad and attempting to rouse Daesh supporters to continue their fight. Globally, we must stop the spread of this message and prevent the violent jihadist ideology resonating with a new generation of recruits. This is a unique challenge in the information environment. In our combined joint task force, we are doing everything we can to defeat Daesh in Iraq and Syria, and the global coalition and the international community must continue its work to prevent the evil brand from spreading worldwide and terrorizing our communities at home. In Iraq, we are working at the invitation of the Iraqi government, helping to train their security forces, enabling their operations, and striking Daesh fighters, leaders, facilitators and financiers wherever and whenever we find them. The Iraqi army, supported by the coalition and by Iraqi F-16 fighter jets and C-130 transport aircraft, are disrupting the network of Daesh cells across Nineveh, Salah ad-Din, Anbar, Diyala and Kirkuk provinces. Recent operations in Wadi Ashai and the Hamrin Mountains have cleared successfully hundreds of miles of territory in which Daesh groups were hiding. Daesh commanders and fighters have been killed or captured, and weapons, ammunition and IED making equipment has been seized. We must congratulate the Iraqi security forces on their successes, but not forget the huge sacrifices they have made in the last 5 years. Central to their success is the coalition's Build Partner Capacity Programme, which seeks to enhance Iraqi security capabilities through training, mentoring and equipping our Iraqi partners. And as they improve, our focus will switch from training the Iraqi troops directly to mentoring the Iraqi trainers, as they take a greater responsibility for training their troops themselves. In northeast Syria, there are ongoing discussions at the political level to ensure the stability of the region. From our military perspective, we must continue working with our partners to create the conditions in which Daesh cannot thrive again, and to ensure a secure environment in which our partners in the international community can operate. Having defeated Daesh's physical holdings in Baghdad, our partners are now progressing steadily back up the Euphrates River Valley, clearing the remnants of Daesh. The pace is slow and it's methodical, with the ground and buildings seeded with IEDs and booby traps, but progress is being made. On the humanitarian side, you will all be aware of the tens of thousands of internally displaced persons and refugees in northeast Syria. Local and international humanitarian organisations are managing the situation, but we must be mindful that there is a large concentration of radicalised individuals in these camps who will want to return to their homes in Syria, Iraq and elsewhere. We need to assist with de-radicalisation and education to prevent a new generation of Daesh emerging when these people go home. Militarily, we continue our campaign to ensure the lasting defeat of Daesh. But we cannot do it ourselves. Campaigns cannot be won by fighting alone. Instead, it requires a whole-of-government approach with the support of the international community, assisting the government of Iraq and the Syrian civil councils to set the conditions for the stability and the prosperity that they crave. Any instability will create opportunities for Daesh to thrive. Daesh will exploit the divisions in society and fragile governance to become the organisation to whom the population turns to provide security. We cannot allow this to happen. Daesh's widespread killings, the brutal executions, the destructions of towns, cities and ancient monuments must remain a thing of the past. So I think, just to sum up my opening remarks, I would say that Daesh still pose a significant threat in Iraq and Syria and to the wider world. It has morphed into an underground network that we must root out and destroy. We will continue to work with our partner forces to achieve this militarily. Our partner forces are improving daily, but they still need our assistance. Strong governance and effective stabilisation will be the long-term key to providing security and prosperity. The international community, I suggest, must do all it can to help. And I think with that, Sean, I'd be happy to take any questions there are.
Thank you very much, sir. For all of your questions, please provide your full name and agency prior to asking your question, and I would ask that you limit yourself to one follow-up. Idris.
Sure, Idris Ali from Reuters. Obviously, the coalition troops work in close proximity of Iranian proxy forces and sort of the PMF. Have you seen a change in their behavior over the past few weeks, especially since the United States has been talking about the threat that they potentially pose to coalition troops?
So we've seen no change in the posture or the laydown of the PMF, and of course the PMF is a moniker for a very broad range of groups. So I think it's important to say that many of them are compliant, and we have seen, as I say, no change in their posture since the recent exchange between the United States and Iran, and we hope and expect that that will continue.
And just a quick follow-up, are you concerned that sort of some of the bellicose statements from both sides, but primarily the United States, could put coalition troops in danger, especially from sort of some of the proxy forces in Iraq?
So I think there's a couple of points about this. Am I concerned about the danger? No, not really. We take a range of force protection measures for operating in this part of the world against a whole range of threats. And we review them regularly. We've reviewed them, obviously, in the light of the events of the last week or so. You wouldn't expect me to go into what they are in detail, but we find them completely satisfactory, and we don't intend to change them and our escalation process within them. There is a broader process and a broader point, I think, about Iran while we're on the subject. And I want to make quite clear that we are a counter-Daesh mission. Our mission is to defeat Daesh. I have no part of Iran in any of my orders, in any of my directives, or in any of my planning documents. Iran is no part of our mission. We are here at the invitation of the Iraqi government to defeat Daesh, not to have anything to do with Iran. I just want to put that one out there because I think it's really important at this stage.
Carla.
Carla Babb, Voice of America. Thanks for doing this so much. I'm interested in seeing, have you seen any threats by Iranian-backed groups in either Syria or Iraq against coalition forces? Have you seen any threat indications?
No, there's been no increased threat from Iranian-backed forces in Iraq and Syria. We're aware of their presence clearly, and we monitor them along with a whole range of others because that's the environment we're in. But as I say, we see no. We have no part of Iran in our mission. We are monitoring the Shia militia groups I think you're referring to carefully, and if the threat level perceives to go up, then we'll raise our force protection measures accordingly.
Barbara Starr from CNN. General, you know, given everything you just said, what you're saying is a little bit surprising, I suspect, because the U.S. says very much and very publicly that there is an Iranian threat to forces, land forces in Iraq and Syria. So I'd like you to square that for me. You see no threat? Do you believe there is a threat? Help us understand why your view is, on the surface at least, so different. And I have a quick follow-up.
So I don't think there's a difference here at all. There are a range of threats to American and coalition forces in Iraq and Syria. We monitor them all. Iranian-backed forces is clearly one of them. And I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but there are a substantial number of militia groups in Iraq and Syria, and we don't see any increased threat from many of them at this stage.
My other question very quickly is, now that Baghdadi has appeared on video, what is your assessment on whether you believe the coalition will be able to capture him?
Yes, I believe we will be able to capture him. We don't know where he is at the moment. If we did, we would, with our partner force, conduct an operation against him. People of this sort don't remain at liberty for long, and I'm completely confident we will capture him. But he, I think, is of less relevance as every day that goes by. He's one ISIS leader amongst many, and so whilst we do look for him, and I'm completely confident he will be captured, it's part of our ongoing operations.
Joe. General Ghika, I would like to ask you, given that the coalition led by the United States works at a very close proximity to the PMF, my question for you is, do you have any daily or weekly contacts with the PMF leadership?
So the question you ask is a very broad one, because the PMF covers an enormous range of groups who were brought into the fold of the Iraqi security forces in the fall of 2016, many of whom played a significant part in liberating Iraq from Daesh. Now, for us, we divide them, those that are compliant with the rule of law, those that have been assimilated and brought into the Iraqi security forces, we communicate with through the chain of command of the Iraqi security forces. So we have interlocutors in the senior leadership of the Iraqi security forces. We talk to them on a very regular basis, but that is how we communicate with those elements of the PMF who are inside the Iraqi security forces. There are then a series of non-compliant actors in the PMF, and you know perfectly well who I'm talking about, and we do not have any interaction with them.
Quick follow-up, General Ghika. Given what you said about that you don't have any credible information about Iranian threats against the coalition, as a commander on the ground, do you think there is some exaggeration from the U.S. side when the White House has announced that they have credible information that Iran is planning to target U.S. forces in Iraq? You guys, the leadership of the coalition and the United States, you are not on the same page when it comes to those information about Iranian threats. How do you explain that?
So we're on exactly the same page. What I said is that we monitor a range of threats. There are a range of threats to the coalition and US forces in Iraq and Syria. We monitor them all very carefully. Clearly at a time like this, some go up, some go down, and that happens routinely. But we monitor all those threats. I'm not prepared to go into detail about the detail of our threat reporting, but we monitor it carefully, and we have appropriate force protection measures as a result.
General Tom Bowman with NPR. I wonder if you could focus on Syria for just a second, give us a sense of the overall stabilization efforts there. We were told, I think, last fall that the coalition would have to train 40,000 or so local security forces to patrol in places like Raqqa and so forth. And also, when I was here last year, they were training local young men how to remove IEDs. So if you give us a sense of those numbers, and finally, if you could give us a sense of, as you move back up the Euphrates River Valley, the stabilization effort, you're going to have to bring back water, sewer, electricity to some of these areas. Talk about the need. How much money is this going to cost? Do you have a ballpark estimate? And clearly, as we've been told, you're going to be there for years.
Well, first of all, on the capability of the SDF, I'm not going to go into exact numbers because in northeast Syria that's sensitive, but if I just said that we're climbing steadily up to the total of 40,000, and I think we will get there. The activity that's being conducted by those forces is very effective, and they are now bringing a de-ISIS, a defeat ISIS effect to northeast Syria, and they are disrupting ISIS's operations there. As you rightly say, stabilization of those areas is tremendously important because the communities need to see the benefit of being liberated from ISIS and then the return of the essential services which will enable them to continue their lives and which will in themselves generate stability. The range of money required changes depending on who you talk to. Various aid organizations and reconstruction agencies set it at different amounts. And so it's really hard to give you a single figure. What I would say is that hundreds of millions of dollars have been donated, and they are being spent by organizations such as the State Department's START program, which has got education, rebuilding, rehabilitation programs all in train, which I think are very impressive. So I think it's a combination for northeast Syria. I think the broader point is that it's a combination of security provided by a trained and enhanced SDF, which is conducting counter-Daesh operations, combined with the stabilization effect from the international community.
And you said you're climbing steadily toward that 40,000 number for like local security forces. Are you halfway there, 25% of the way there? Can you give us a ballpark, and how long will it take?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're between 10 and 20,000 at the moment and climbing steadily. Clearly, how quickly we go up and the numbers that we train at any one time will depend upon the structure of the SDF as they reconfigure themselves in the aftermath of the clearance of the MIRV. I think from our perspective, I would just say that we are wholly committed to supporting the SDF as they move into this phase so that in partnership we can counter the threat from Daesh.
Sylvie?
Sylvie Lantôme from AFP. Can you tell us if the security level of the OIR troops has been heightened in Iraq and Syria because of the perception of Iranian threats?
I could say what I said earlier, which is that there are a range of threats to the American and coalition forces in Iraq and Syria, which we monitor constantly. They go up and down depending on a range of factors, and based on those factors is how we set our force protection measures. But I'm not prepared to go into more detail than that because it would affect the force protection of those troops that we have here.
Jeff?
Thank you. General Jeff Shogel with Task and Purpose. Can you talk about whether ISIS is moving back into former battlegrounds that AQI and the Sunni insurgency used, Ramadi, Fallujah, the belts south of Baghdad?
Sure. I mean, I think, as I said at the beginning, we have seen ISIS reset themselves to become a series of underground cells which they're using to conduct their campaign. And so the places where we are seeing those particularly as being particularly virulent are in Nineveh, Salah ad-Din, Diyala and Anbar, some of the places that you talk about. But at the same time, I think it's really important to also recognise that the ISF are not leaving them there to grow. And so some of the best operations we've seen the ISF conduct in the last few weeks have been in Wadi Ashai, the Hamarim Mountains, in areas in Nineveh around Hawija and Kirkuk. So this is an organisation that's going after ISIS wherever they find them. So the areas that you're talking about are similar, yes, but I think the thing that makes it different this time is the vigour with which the ISF are going after ISIS.
And one last question about how many ISIS fighters are operating in Iraq right now?
That's a really good question, and it's extremely difficult to discern. And if I said we think in the order of 10,000, but that is, they're not all fighters, a lot of them are support network, and they're spread around.
Lori.
Lori Milroy, Kurdistan 24. Thank you very much, General, for doing this. Could you explain to us, you've talked about ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and there was an IG report from the Pentagon about there's a considerable number of those folks, and you mentioned that as well. Who are they? Aren't they predominantly Iraqi and Syrian?
So they are a mixture. We assess that those who were able to get out of out of Syria and move into Iraq were primarily Iraqis who are returning home. Those who were caught up in the final part of the physical caliphate around Hajin were a mixture of Iraqis, Syrians, and then there were some from around the world, foreign terrorist fighters who had got caught up in it. So I would say it was a broadly even mix of Iraqis and Syrians, but the Iraqis have now returned home to Iraq, if they're able to do so.
Yes, but my question, which amounts to a devastating critique of the Anglo-American approach to this whole problem, so let me, okay, isn't in any place that you talk about, whether it's Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Burkina Faso, the basic problem a local struggle over resources and power with an overlay of Islamic ideology? And if you focus on Islamic ideology, you are providing a cover for those people who are fighting over resources and power and attracting lots of disturbed people, many of them youngsters, to go fight on behalf of some grand cause. Is that a fair critique?
No, I don't think it is. These are overlying parts of one complete picture. And so the campaign that we are fighting has to be a mix of countering the ideology. That is necessarily a world problem because the ideology can be spread across the internet, it can be spread across media, things like that, and it radicalizes people in home nations. But at the same time, we must continue to conduct military operations in the places where ISIS is physically present. So that the fact that this is a campaign of many parts, I think is completely natural. I think it's a good response to the threat we see in front of us. But you're right to highlight the vulnerability of young people who can easily become radicalized. And I think it is a world problem which everybody has a part to play, in which everyone has a part to play, in countering that so that we stamp out the ideology and it does not become the sort of seed corn and the feed which ISIS uses going forward.
Qasim.
General Ghika, Qasim Ilari with Anadolu Agency. Thank you very much for doing this. You said on northeast Syria, you said political discussion over stability of that area continues. Can you tell us who is discussing these political issues? Who are you talking about having these discussions of stability?
Hey, Sean, can you just repeat the question, please? That broke a little.
So Qasim's question was about the, you talked about political discussions in northeast Syria, and his question was who is having those political discussions in northeast Syria?
Yeah, sure. So these are discussions being conducted by diplomats between the Turkish government, between the SDF and SDC to determine how the future of northeast Syria will look following the end of the physical caliphate.
Just a clarification. Did you say that the Turkish diplomats and SDF are discussing about stability in northeast Syria?
His follow-up, sir, is Qasim is asking if you are saying that the SDF and their diplomats are speaking with Turkish diplomats.
No, I said the American diplomats. So Ambassador Jim Jeffrey, the U.S. ambassador for this area, is talking to both the Turkish government and also to the SDF to try and chart a way forward for northeast Syria following the end of the physical caliphate.
And using my follow-up right now, there is a rising wave of protests in predominantly Arab areas in northeast Syria, asking YPG to leave their kind of residential areas. Do you have any measure underway to meet these demands?
So his question was growing protests in northeast Syria in predominantly Arab areas, and is there any plan to ask the YPG to leave those areas?
So we're monitoring the protests and the fact that the SDF and SDC went to Ionisa and they held a huge gathering to listen to the concerns of people. And I think it's important to point out that many of these were about quality of life and the conditions in a post-Daesh northeast Syria, as much as they were about the tribal and ethnic tensions within the area and the SDF. I think the important thing is that we're through that phase now, and we have a path going forward in which everybody recognises that the predominant threat in the area is ISIS, and that to break or fracture now would not be helpful, because it would allow the regrowth of ISIS, and that would threaten the security and stability of the region.
Thank you.
Lucas?
Lucas Tomlinson, Fox News. General, do you agree with the U.S. assessment that there's an increased risk by attack on U.S. or coalition forces by Iran or Iranian proxy forces?
So I'm going to say the same that I said at the start, which is that we monitor a range of threats to the coalition and American forces here. Because there are a range of threats from a number of different actors. They go up and down according to various other contextual factors. I'm not prepared to go into more detail. We have a range of force protection measures to protect us against those threats, which we raise and reduce according to the nature of the threat. And I'm not going to go into more detail because Iran is not a part of our mission. We are here to defeat ISIS, and that is what we focus on.
General, there just appears to be a disconnect between what you're saying and what the U.S. government is saying. You're saying you don't see any, quote, increased threat from Iranian-backed forces to the coalition, but the White House and the U.S. government is saying there is an increased threat. We're just trying to figure out who's right here.
Yeah, sure. And that's not what I said. I said there are a range of threats to the American and coalition forces in this part of the world. There always have been, and that is why we have a very robust range of force protection measures. The threats come from a range of different groups. We monitor them carefully. We raise and reduce our force protection levels accordingly. More than that, I'm not going to go into, because I say my main focus is on countering Daesh, but I don't think we're out of step with the White House at all.
Would you say the threat is increasing, decreasing, or staying the same from Iran or its proxy forces?
I'm saying that we monitor the threats to the American and coalition forces in Iraq and Syria very carefully, and we adjust our force protection measures accordingly.
I'm going to move on, Lucas. Sir.
Thank you. Raghuveer Goyal, India, Globe and Asia Today. Thank you, General. My question is that now this war has been going for a long time, and many people are asking how long this will continue. So many nations are fighting to disrupt or to kill or end these terrorists or ISIS. And I have a follow-up, please. And if the locals are with you or not.
So, Sean, could you just repeat that?
Yeah. So the question was, this war has been going on for some time, and how long do you see it continuing, sir? And then whether or not the locals are with the coalition.
So let me take the second part of that question first. We see significant support for the coalition in the liberated areas which have been taken back from Daesh. And that should be no surprise, because these people were living under an appalling oppression. They were living in appalling conditions where the ability of them to live their normal lives was completely removed by a brutal group. I wouldn't characterize this campaign in terms of time. I characterize it in terms of the effect we're having on ISIS. And if you look at the start of this in 2014, and you look 5 years later, that has completely changed. And so I think we will continue with our operations to ensure the enduring defeat of Daesh. There are a range of different factors which come to play when it comes to talking about time. But for me, as a military person, I'm focused on the effect that I can have to defeat Daesh during the time that I'm here.
Just a quick follow-up. Can you say if ISIS are the one who are disrupting or behind the oil disruption in the area, and also at the same time, can you say that they are going back and forth from Afghanistan to the region, and also as far as the earlier attacks in Sri Lanka, if these people are behind?
Sean, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah, so I think this was actually a three-part question. One, is ISIS responsible for the disruption in the region? Do you see movement of ISIS from Afghanistan to the region in Syria and Iraq? And do you believe that ISIS was involved in the Sri Lanka bombing?
Let me take the last one first. I think the thing that was involved in the Sri Lanka bombing was ISIS's ideology. And I talked earlier about the importance of countering the ideology. So the people who perpetrated Sri Lanka were clearly inspired by the ISIS ideology. And that highlights, I think, to us the importance of preventing the ideology from spreading, of de-radicalization, and of ensuring that they cannot propagate this to other parts of the world. On Afghanistan, we do not see any movement of people from Afghanistan to Iraq and Syria at this time, because ISIS, when it first started in 2014, was an attractive brand. People came from around the world to join it. It was the place people wanted to be. Today, it simply isn't. And I think the lure of foreign fighters coming to join ISIS in Iraq and Syria has declined substantially. Are ISIS responsible for the disruption in the region? You would have to expect me to say that ISIS are responsible for considerable turmoil, disruption, and havoc in northeast Syria and in large parts of Iraq, because between 2014 and broadly 2016-17, they wrought an appalling havoc on the region. And so I can't say that they are not responsible for some of the situations and some of the what we're looking at today in parts of Iraq and Syria.
So I'm gonna go with just the questions that I have down here on the sheet at this point. Caitlin?
Hi, Kim Kay with Stars and Stripes. My question is, how many do you estimate ISIS fighters that are in Syria? And then I have a follow-up.
So that's a really hard question to answer, and I think I would put it at some below 10,000, but some thousands.
Okay. And also, in Iraq and Syria, are you seeing any, I guess, like surges in more fighters in certain areas, and if so, where?
What we're seeing is in certain areas that ISIS are trying to reset themselves, reorganize themselves, reorientate themselves for what they see as the next phase of their campaign. So this is the move away from the physical caliphate to a series of underground cells. And that's the sort of nature of what we're seeing at the moment.
Hi. Thank you. General Fadi Mansour with Al Jazeera Arabic. Are you concerned that this heightened tension between the U.S. and Iran will affect in any way the mission of the coalition in Iraq? And I have a follow-up as well.
Sure. Well, I mean, we are aware of the heightened tension, but the focus of our efforts is on defeat ISIS and on the defeat ISIS mission. And so really, we're not going to be deflected from our de-ISIS mission. We're aware of the context in the region. As I said before, we monitor a number of threats to us. But for us, the central point of us being here is to conduct a de-ISIS mission at the invitation of the government of Iraq, and that's what we're doing.
And on that last point, clearly you're fighting ISIS in Iraq based on the invitation from the government, so your mission will end when the Iraqi government sees fit. However, that's not the case in Syria. So how long is the coalition mission in Syria will last, or is it an open-ended mission?
So we have a conditions-based approach to this, and for us and the coalition in the coalition forces, we will continue our mission until we write down ISIS to a point at which we consider them to be defeated. So we're looking to achieve the enduring defeat of ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and that is the CJTF mission, and that is what we are here to engage in.
Ashley.
Hi, Ashley Roki with Janes. General, I wanted to clarify a point. I believe it was to Carla's question. You said that you had not seen an increase in Iranian threat, but then there was to Lucas, you said that it's up and down. Can you square those two answers? Are we misunderstanding?
Sure, and I'll say it again. I mean, to be really clear, we monitor a range of threats to the CJTF and to the coalition forces in Iraq and Syria. We monitor them carefully. There are a range of them, as you would expect in this part of the world, and we have an appropriate response depending on the threat. I'm not going to go into where the increases and decreases are and what our force protection measures are, because that would compromise the safety of our force. But we monitor a range of threats and we respond appropriately.
But I'm going to jump in here, General. Sorry, sir. This is Carla Babb. I asked you about that question, and you said there was no increased threat against the coalition by Iranian-backed forces. We are aware of their presence. We are monitoring the Shia militia groups carefully. And if the threat grows up, we will monitor accordingly. And I know that wasn't exact. That's just from my notes, sir. But you did say that there was no increased threat. And now you're saying you can't say whether or not. So did you misspeak when you were answering my question? How should we interpret that, sir? Thank you.
Sure. And I mean, we are monitoring the situation here. We monitor a range of different threats from a range of different groups. And we set a force protection measure for our force according to the threats from which we monitor. So I'm not going to go into the detail of where the threats have increased and decreased, but I'm just going to say that we monitor them all very carefully. We're clearly aware of the context, and we'll keep it under review. So
is that statement not accurate? There's no increased threat against coalition by Iranian-backed forces. Is that statement that you said at 11:08, is that inaccurate? I just want to know for reporting purposes.
Well, there are a range of Iranian-backed forces. There are a range of forces. I think you're talking about the PMF. There are a range of groups in the PMF. The last count, there are dozens. So it's very difficult to start to delineate between them. But if I just said to you that there are plenty of Iranian-backed forces in the PMF who do not present any threat whatsoever to the coalition, and we are monitoring the range of them very carefully.
Kathy.
Hi, Kathy Gilsonan from The Atlantic. Can you comment on recent activity in Idlib province, understanding that the diplomats are taking care of the political element, but how does the coalition envisage its role in the event of an escalation there, a further escalation there? Thank you.
Sure. Idlib province is not part of our operation. We do not have any presence in Idlib, but clearly we monitor the situation there very carefully. And I think it would be, you know, the CJTF's position is that we would call on all parties involved in the conflict in Idlib to cease their operations and to move apart. Because what's happening at the moment is that substantial human suffering is taking place. There is a breakdown in stability and security, and the only people who can benefit from such a situation are ISIS and other violent extremist organizations.
Okay, thank you. That's all the time we have for questions this morning.
Just clarify one thing with the General. Hey, General, if we could clarify one thing in the threat level, because it's always public. You walk into the Pentagon, you walk into a base, it'll tell you what the threat level is for that day. So again, have you raised the threat level in Baghdad, or is it still the same?
If you walk into the base in Baghdad and you come here, then you can see the threat level.
I'm sorry, sir, you're based in Baghdad, we are not. Has the threat level been raised or not?
So if you come to Baghdad and you come into our base in Baghdad, then we'll tell you what the threat level is.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the time we do have for questions. Sir, did you have any final words for those here?
No, Sean, thank you very much indeed. I haven't done one of these for a while. I enjoy doing them, and we will try and reinstitute them more regularly than we have done in the past. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General, for your time, and have a fantastic day.
Thanks, Sean. Goodbye.